Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. I want to thank you for joining us. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to Rino Murata. Rino is a certified trauma-informed coach. She specializes in communication, parenting, autism, and neurodiversity. Her sociology background provides her a unique lens to not only identify societal connections and gaps, but also actively contribute to shaping a society that is genuinely diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Living in Vancouver with her husband, 3 children, 2 stepchildren, and their cherished dog, Rino's greatest joy comes from cooking for her family. Rino, I am so happy to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Gia. So happy to be here.
I'm excited to talk with you today. I think this is going to be such a great conversation. So before we dive in, just so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better, tell us a little bit about your backstory and what led you to the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, so I was just a mom with a neurodivergent kid. And, in the lens of, high achieving woman, I believe that there was nothing you can't do with effort. But it wasn't the case in parenting. The kids obviously had, different, not a plan, but not even an agenda. But I think I realized how different they are from me, despite I gave birth to them. So I think that it was kind of like a dissonance. And my older son, he had a lot of trouble, not trouble, but struggles at school. So it wasn't about just effort and, cheerleading him and whatnot. But I think because the resistance or from the schools actually was so strong, it made me realize, okay, maybe, there's a different path. This shouldn't be this hard. I think that was the first awareness that came to mind when I think about it. It doesn't have to be this hard. It all started there. And fast forward 10 years, my kids did graduate. Oh, my older one did graduate high school. At a point, I thought he wouldn't be homeschooled, be unschooled. And it really didn't matter if they went to school or not, but they did. Yeah, they're still in school.
And so now you work with parents. Tell us about the work that you're doing today.
Yes, I believe it's the relationship that really gives kids confidence. The relationship that we have with our kids is so empowering. If you think about how many posts or reels do we see in a day about healing our childhood wounds? What if, our kids don't have to go through that? And I think that's where gentle parenting, those kind of concepts come in. And while I do believe in gentle parenting, I think there's no one size fits all. That's why, coaching, it's so powerful and so effective because we're going to make it work for you. We're going to make your parenting style, not you fitting in someone else's concept of this is how, parenting should be. And I think that at the end of the day makes parenting easier. And when it's easier, you have better relationships with your kids.
I love what you said about, well, first of all, I'm going to go back to the first thing you said, which was, I was just a mom, and there's no such thing, right? Because parenting is the hardest job in the world. So, I want to just acknowledge that there's no such thing as just a mom. It is the most important and probably the hardest job, right? That most of us will ever have. And so, and I love how you recognized that the system you were working within wasn't working. Right? That you were facing this uphill battle resistance, and you, instead of
continuing in that cycle, decided to sort of take a different path. And I think it's really hard for people when we get stuck in those times of struggle to fall into that victim mode and just sort of throw our hands up in the air, right? And so kudos to you for sort of recognizing we need to do something different here, and sort of creating a new path for not just yourself, but for your family, your children, like your, other families as well. And so I think that's incredibly powerful. And I love this concept of the parent-child relationship can be so empowering, and the converse is also true. It can also be so disempowering. And so it is a matter, I think, of being very intentional about being a parent and how you're raising your children, and reflecting on what worked in your childhood and what didn't work in your childhood, right? And so to your point, a lot of us are sort of healing from some of the old wounds, and it's, how do we not replicate that in the next generation, which is so important.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It just kind of reminded me of, what was like the pivotal moment that I decided to change, decided to make that change. And, in the path was, I had a moment. My oldest one was maybe 8, 9, and he yelled at me, "I hate you."
Oh,
And oh my gosh, that is a stab in the heart.
absolutely. Hits you in the heart.
It does. You love your kids so much, almost more than your own life.
Right.
And it only took 8 years for my child to tell me that he hated me. So that was like, it really put me in
Mm-hmm.
like a self-reflective mode. What did I do?
Sure.
I thought I was doing everything for him, but what is it that he's not getting? And I originally come from Tokyo, and Japan, suicidal rates are very high. So I thought, okay, I just kind of thought there must be some sort of connection between, now and then. And I had an intuitive moment, if I chose to stay on this path, it was just an intuition. Either myself wouldn't see my son past 14, or I wouldn't see my son past 14. It was just one of those moments. And I thought, I need to take this seriously in what keeps a person alive. I won't be here forever. You never know when your last day is going to be.
Yeah.
And what keeps a person alive, no matter how dark the days are. And it came down to, trusting yourself, the self-confidence. It's basically being able to trust yourself that I can. But how do we foster and how do we cultivate that, that self-trust? We can tell them all the right words, but will they actually genuinely trust themselves? Will they feel and will they know? So, that goes back like about 10 or so, 10, 12 years. But yeah, that was the beginning. Again, that was the beginning.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's like, really hard for any parent to hear, but definitely I could see that being an important moment, right? A turning point, really, in terms of what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong, or what could we do better, right? Because there's shades of right and wrongs. It's like, what could we be doing better? What could we be doing differently? And every child is unique. And so it's a matter of figuring out what works and what is effective. And I love, what you're saying about teaching them to trust themselves and their intuition. Because I see in the work that I do so many middle-aged women who are really now battling those layers that we've developed to shield ourselves, and trying to break those down to get back in touch with our intuition, right? And our inner core, and listening to our inner voice. And that takes sometimes years to undo. So I think it's a beautiful thing in terms of that self-trust and helping kids to develop that early on, because that's a lifelong skill, right?
Right. And, you're absolutely right. I knew the answer was for my kids to be able to trust themselves. But then immediately after was, do I trust myself?
Mm,
I did it. That's why I was always looking for external advice, how other
Yeah.
people are doing it, how other people make it successful, and try to apply it. But was I truly, truly trusting myself? I think that was probably the hardest thing in parenting, actually,
Yeah.
was not the different path, but trusting myself.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. And how did you learn to do that at that point in your life as a parent?
That was a couple of months of almost excruciating observation, examination. But I think it came down to I'm not a bad person. I am not inherently bad. So I wasn't able to trust myself because I was either wrong or I may be bad or I could be hurting someone. But just like, the trees and flowers, they're like, we can't see them as flawed just because they go brown or, they grow up a different way. Nothing is inherently wrong. I think that was one of the awareness
Hmm.
that I don't have to be afraid of myself. And, sure, let's just accept that I will make mistakes. But it doesn't mean, we can't or I can't make corrections. And it's just adjustments. And I think it was that whole notion of not aiming for perfection at the end of the rainbow, but it's in the everyday moment. How does it feel at this moment is exactly what you can expect 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And it's just minor, tiny, tiny adjustments and tiny improvements that kind of guarantees you success in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's incredible. And good for you for recognizing it and really embracing it and owning it, because I think you're right. I think in order for us to trust ourselves, we have to accept ourselves and recognize that we are worthy and that we do have good intentions, right? And that and you're also modeling that behavior for your kids, right? So it's one thing to tell them to do it. It's another thing to really show them how to do it and live that and embody it and lead by example.
Oh, you are so right. The walk the talk, being the role
Yeah.
model, being in integrity, yourself is it's so difficult because we're
Yeah.
only human, we do
Yeah.
have judgments. And there's nothing wrong with having judgments. It's, what you do with that judgment. And does this apply or is it about me or is it about them? I just finished taking a course about DEI. And one of the assignments was about role modeling. And because I don't work at a workplace, I decided to interview, my kids, 5 of
Mm-hmm.
them,
Mm-hmm.
and my husband. And I wanted to see how inclusive they think our family is.
Uh-huh.
And they said, because you and dad are just always doing it. Like, huh? That was like
Mm.
a little pat on the back
Yeah, sure.
that, we do model a certain behavior and they're
Sure.
actually watching. They actually learn how it's done, how it makes it feel. And they may not actually like think about it like, we do because they're kids. They're between 12 and 19. But they kind of instinctively know when it's
Yeah.
done for them. And I thought, okay, that's really powerful. We can be saying all the right things and doing the wrong things,
Yeah.
and that will be what they will take away from it.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I think we all have experiences like that we can reflect on. So
Yeah.
really powerful point. And earlier you mentioned, the concept of gentle parenting, which I know is sort of a hot topic. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about gentle parenting, what it is from your perspective. I've heard people say things like, well, that's not the way I was raised, or, well, yeah, but then they're not going to be disciplined. And how do you discipline your children? So I'm wondering if you could just clarify for our listeners this concept of gentle parenting and what it means to you.
I think gentle parenting, the name itself is very misleading,
Yeah.
to be honest. Of course, we want to be gentle. but it's a little, I don't know how, what we want at the end of gentle parenting, I think is what we want, but how we get there may not necessarily mean being gentle all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe in collaborating with kids, however they're kids. And being an adult, we naturally know more about how things could work, how workplaces and society is. And I'm just honest with my kids, no one has to like you. Not everyone is going to like you.
It's a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah, and you're going
Yeah.
to have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
But still, when you start working, you will have to work with people you don't like either.
Yeah.
But how do we make that work?
Sure.
So gentle parenting, I come from Japan. Let's just put that at the forefront.
Yeah. Yeah.
So discipline it's a given. I think it's a responsibility for a parent to discipline our kids. I'm not talking about corporal punishment, or I'm not talking about physical punishment per se, but have I hit my kids? I have, when they were young. We used to live in Japan, Tokyo, and I used to live in Hong Kong as well.
Mm.
It was just normal. It's controversial, I know, in the Western world. Do I regret it? Sure, I do. Did I cry after I put my kids to bed and watch them sleep peacefully and cry because I had to slap them or hit them? Of course I have. But did they do something? They did.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it's the right thing. I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer. Are my kids, do they have a certain amount of fear for me because I was like that? I think they do. They know that I have no tolerance with disrespect whatsoever. I mean, I don't hit them anymore, but, they learn how to speak. They learn how to, use their tone of voice and like attitudes, or that is unacceptable, but it takes both. I am respectful to you, and you shall show me the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just, how do we get there, right? How do we get mutual respect without entitlement
Mm-hmm.
having the outcome?
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think, Gia?
I know it's such an interesting concept, and I agree with you. The term is misleading. What I hear you saying is it's about collaboration, recognizing you're still the adult, right? Your job is to keep them safe and, healthy. But the mutual respect, I think, is the key piece of it, right? So I do believe it is about setting appropriate boundaries and teaching them regimen and structure. But I think it requires a lot more listening than we were raised with. I think it's allowing kids to feel their feelings, no matter what they're feeling, and accept and embrace the spectrum of feelings, right? And recognizing that they're all valid and they all have a place. As women, I know some of us are still doing that, in middle age. And so it's, I find myself teaching them things that I'm learning simultaneously,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, listening, absolutely. And, listening. So that's where I think our trauma-informed training really, really comes in help, helpful and useful, is the listening. We get to sit with our discomfort
Yeah.
and listen. Because for being parents, we want to protect, we want to guide, we want to show them, all these other different ways that maybe they can see, but how do they see it? And what I've learned is the assumptions are, I think it's safe to assume the assumptions are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're our kids doesn't mean we know them. And because they're kids, they grow so fast.
Yeah.
And I'm always constantly surprised how much more insight they actually have about themselves. So, when you let them speak, we learn who they are And then, we're able to relate and speak to them in a way that makes sense for them, what is meaningful for them, and they feel heard and understood. And it's just small accumulations of them feeling understood and we showing them that we want to know about them. We want to learn about them. We're not telling them what to do, but we want to be partners with them. I think it goes a long way. And you also mentioned about boundaries earlier and like setting regimens or whatnot. And I think it comes down to being principle based
Mm-hmm.
rather than rules.
Yes.
And that notion often by itself makes parenting really easy when it's principle based. When it's principle based, there's not a lot you need to remember. Maybe it's like 4 or 5 things, principles that you have that's really important to you, which is like values in a way. But when you know that, you can immediately think if there's some sort of, I don't know, turmoil or challenge in the family or with your kids, what's important to you? What would an outcome that is aligned to this principle look like? Then what do I do now to go
Mm-hmm.
there?
Mm-hmm.
That hardly ever goes wrong.
Yeah. Reno, what you just said is like so profound. It's such a life-changing shift, I think, for so many parents, especially for those of us, and most of us were raised in rules-based environments where this is acceptable and this is not.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of gray and there wasn't a lot of room for interpretation, right?
Right.
Because you were told yes or no. And so you didn't have to think a whole lot. But the shift is, I love what you said about being principle based because the principles are tied to your core values. And so if you're espousing, embodying your core values and living your core values, it does come very organically to you when you feel that something is off, right? You're able to put your finger on it and ask questions and get curious about it and gauge the right way to behave in that situation or what the right next step is, and really empowers your children
Right.
to think for themselves in that situation and then be able to extract and apply that in other facets of life and situations where you're not there to tell them what to do, right? When they go off to college and they don't have you there, so I think that is so incredibly powerful. And I can't help but make the analogy, I have a background in corporate, and I can't help but make the analogy between this sort of newer age style of parenting and the newer age style of leadership. And that overlap for me is so strong because what we're talking about is coaching our children, right? Just like we would coach our teams in the workplace and listening to them and validating their feelings and their experiences and having empathy and being vulnerable and being compassionate, right? So it is in a way being that sturdy leader for them and not just telling them what to do, but guiding them to make their own informed decisions.
Right. Yes. Yeah, leadership and parenting. Completely, totally transferable skills.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
You're right. I think, how I grew up was definitely a top-down approach.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, my father was born right after the Second World War, so very old, traditional,
Of course.
parenting mind or how people should be. So, yeah, for sure. But I think what happened was I knew the rules. I shouldn't break them. If I break them, I'll get in trouble. So let me see how I can do it so I don't get caught. It
Yeah.
was my way.
Yeah. I think a lot of us were in that place. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Now you have me thinking a lot.
And this is a great conversation. So tell us a little bit more about the work that you do today. And I know you said your son is 19. You talk about how we can look at schools and workplaces as a continuum rather than stages.
Mhm.
And, I know you have experience in DEI. So can you talk to us a little bit about that work that you're doing and, your perspective on that?
Right. So it kind of was a learning and awareness that came from both ends. Like my
Mm-hmm.
children being autistic, neurodivergent,
Yeah.
OCD, anxiety, dyslexic, speech language disorder, processing
Yeah.
disorder.
Yeah.
And also working with adults who are neurodivergent, who are autistic and
Uh-huh.
ADHD, have ADHD, and what they're experiencing in the workplaces. Workplaces obviously need a lot of improvement. They do need to have a lot of improvement in terms of diversity and equity and inclusion, but it's a relationship. I still look at it as a relationship between people. And how do we make that work? So the workplace would have a general understanding of DEI, but the employees will need to have self-advocacy skills to express what they need, how they need it, how much of it they need. And it's not, again, it kind of ties back to that's why it can be entitlement, because you cannot demand what you need. It's like a negotiation, it's a collaboration, but how do we meet in the middle? And I think that's so important. It's not black and white at all. But when I think about my child needing self-advocacy skills, it's about being able to tell people what it is that he needs in a very basic way so people
Mm-hmm.
understand.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not just looking at someone like rolling his eyes, but like a blank stare. He actually didn't process what they said.
Yeah.
So, being upfront, I think it's helpful if you can be and get the understanding that, you need so that you can, provide something that they need. It's just a collaborative thing. And I think that's what's missing is the self-advocacy skills. Doesn't matter if you're neurodivergent. And, in the DEI world, everyone benefits when, the environment is diverse, equitable, and inclusive climate. Everyone benefits. So, but why not, right?
Yeah.
And we want all of us, I wouldn't say like get to, what do you call it, getting along. I don't expect that. But we could be respectful of each other
Mm-hmm.
at a
Mm-hmm.
workplace and, make it a collaboration, make it a teamwork, see how both ends could meet in the middle. I think that's what's missing.
Yeah,
It's
for
not
sure.
my way or the highway.
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and I definitely, again, see that correlation between parenting and leadership and how self-advocacy can play such an important role and how it's so important. And, before the show, you and I were talking briefly just about this concept of self-advocacy and as high-achieving women and moms and that want to protect our kids, even our teams at work, right? We can become very attached and very like overprotective. So what would you say to those parents who have a hard time letting go and teaching self-advocacy? What advice would you give them?
Trust.
Mm,
Trust that they will be okay. Trust that even if they fail, they will be okay. Trust. Yeah, trust is so empowering. It's so empowering. They get the freedom, they get the liberty, they have someone who has your back because you trust them.
yeah,
Imagine how powerful and empowering that is. That you get to try something and they trust you that you'll be okay. You'll get through this. If you can, we'll do this together. But that trust, I think, is such a powerful not belief, but it's an action, right?
yeah,
It comes it's an everyday thing.
for sure. I think it's super powerful, and the trust is really important. And I can say from just personal experience parenting, when I learned to, and it's an ongoing struggle, right? It's something I have to continuously remind myself of. but they are capable of far more than I had given them credit for, right? And when you start to give them a little more autonomy in appropriate ways, right? Age appropriate ways, they step up for the most part. And they see that they are far more capable than they even realized.
Right.
Right. And so we're not allowing them to spread their wings and step into their full potential if we keep trying to protect them and keep them safe and do everything for them. And I think that's really, really hard lesson when it comes to parenting, especially as moms.
Oh, it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
Just a couple months ago, my other son, he has OCD and anxiety, and he had a really, really bad episode that really it just shook the core of his ground, and he was unable to live a normal life for a couple of months. So we had a lot of talk during that time. And, I just had to ask him, how do you see yourself? I forgot my question, but the answer he gave me was, I'm very confident about myself. Even in that situation, it
Wow.
just blew me away.
Yeah.
And that had, how his situation at that point had really nothing to do with who he was. I thought, wow. And that boy was someone, who didn't know how to turn like a TV with a remote control, like when he was 10. He was just sitting in front of the TV, didn't know what to do. But, when we were unschooling, there's a lot of trust that goes into unschooling, believing that, they're always learning something, and they were. And that same son, not knowing how to flip a TV on, when I'm making YouTube channels, editing, and, putting whatever it is that he needed to do to make a YouTube channel, which I don't know how.
Wow.
And all those, he failed a lot too, apparently.
Sure.
But after a couple of years, I don't know, he became confident. And I think I kind of didn't associate or disassociate being anxious and confident like as a separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I talk about it, I don't think I've quite processed it yet. But yeah, it's just remarkable how much they actually do know about themselves when we ask the right questions, like open-ended, like in coaching. It's not a yes or no, or I'll tell you what, but let them talk.
Yeah.
There's so much insight that they give you. It's quite amazing. It's humbling, actually.
For sure. And I think it helps to build their self-confidence, right? And believe in their abilities and worth, I think, too, which is really critical. Love that. I love it. So, Rino, just before we wrap up, we're talking about parenting, and I would love to know from your perspective, what's one thing you want our listeners to consider doing differently or changing after listening to this episode?
It doesn't happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It is really tiny, mini, almost, I don't know, ridiculous kind of small things that actually makes the change.
Yeah.
So, say, the relationship part, that you want to have this great relationship with your kids. There's this image of the relationship you want to have. So today, when you encounter those moments of discomfort or something that you feel is like, ugh,
Mm-hmm.
realize that and do something slightly different. Maybe you just hold your breath for a moment and give yourself time to think, what could I do different now? What would I rather do now? And those little things will not go unnoticed as long as they're like consistent.
Consistent. Yeah, you're doing it over time. Yeah.
Right, but it's over time. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
So notice it.
Yeah, and it is really about starting small. So I love that. I love that advice. And on this podcast, we talk a lot about success and redefining success. So I would love to know from your perspective, how do you define success for yourself today, and talk about how that definition has evolved for you over time.
Success before was about going to the right schools, going into big companies, and climbing up the ladder.
Sure.
It was something that the end of the rainbow. It was something that was going to happen 10 years from now. But today, success is what I'm feeling at any given moment. That's success. If I see it today, that's success to me. If I see what I wanted today, then that's success to me. And yeah, it's not elusive.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah, I know what it's
Such a,
like
yeah.
to be competitive.
Yeah.
And, there's honestly, there's nothing we can't do. I believe in that too.
Yeah.
But it is the everyday. It's the everyday. Every day counts. Every day is so precious. Every moment is so precious.
Yeah. And being intentional about where you're spending your time and energy and how you want to feel. I love that concept.
Exactly. It's so
Very,
important.
very empowering. Very empowering. I love that. So, Reno, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights, your expertise, and your personal experience and stories. Where can our listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
I would say it would be my website, Rino Murata. But again, that's only such a small facet, and everyone is different. So I would love to know, where you want to go, where they want to go, and
Yeah.
how can we make that work in the lens of everyone learns differently, everyone processes things differently. So yeah, the best way would be to just, we could have a chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So powerful. I love it. Thank you again for being on the show, Reno. And of course, you can visit my website, gialacqua.com, reach out on Instagram at gialacqua, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.